All right, welcome everybody. Have a seat. I feel like they switched up my panels because my last panel was in a slightly smaller room and they're standing room only, and this one is bigger and it's very small. So, I'm Chris Hazard. Many of you have seen me before at MAGFest. I've been speaking here for quite a number of years. I'm most well known for the game Acron, the Time Travel RTS. I run Hazard Software. We mostly do strategy level serious games. That's games for a purpose other than entertainment. So think if imagine you're running a logistics organization or something like that, and you want to make a game to interface your organization. How can we use gaming technology and gaming techniques to do that? I also am affiliated with Sizzle Inc., or Sizzle It, and another startup coming up. My PhD is in artificial intelligence, and I've given a number of talks on that, as some of you have seen. Now, one of the interesting things about the games industry is if you look at a lot of these successful game designers, not just a lot of people in the industry, we all have very different, diverse backgrounds. We like to start a lot of different hobbies. And back when I was in high school, I was put under hypnosis by a stage hypnotist. And that was pretty cool. I thought that was pretty neat. Then I did it again about 6 months later. There was always something in the back of my mind that, oh, that's kind of a neat thing. Before that, I was very much a skeptic of hypnosis, that, is it real, but, all that kind of stuff. So this last year, I decided to get certified as a hypnotist. And that is a class that you take over the course of a month. You hypnotize a lot of people, you learn about all the principles behind it, and then you get your stamp of approval that you can go do it. So, the reason that I did that was, like I said, one was because I was trying to figure out, I was curious about hypnosis, but I was also figuring out what is the connection here? I see serious games, a lot of gaming as behavioral engagement, behavioral engineering, and it's really getting into the psyche of people, flow state, all these sorts of things. So I thought, well, how can I use it here? What are the similarities? And as I was going through the course, I was talking with the instructor, who, she's been a hypnotherapist for, I think, 30 or 40 years. And I was talking to her about, well, how does this relate to other things? How does it relate to games? She thought that was very fascinating. And I started searching out there, and there's really no games out there that deal with hypnosis. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about my thoughts on this and share with you some of my experiences. Before I get to how it relates to games, I'll first talk about, well, first, what is hypnosis? There's the facts and the myths. How does it work? How do you hypnotize somebody? And then I'll start talking about transitioning to how hypnosis applies to games. And at first, it'll start being a talk, like I said, just on the basics of the background of hypnosis. And over the course of the talk, I'm expecting that you'll probably start to see, before I even get to it, some of the relationships between hypnosis and gaming. So first off, what is hypnosis? Anybody have what they would think of if you were to ask someone off the street, what's the definition? Rob?
A waking sleep state.
A waking sleep state. That's pretty close. Go ahead.
An altered mental state where you are more open to suggestion.
Very good. So it is some sort of mind state. Now there's a whole debate among psychologists and neurobiologists about whether it's an actual state or if it's just a sort of mood you're in, if it's stateful or not. But that's sort of another debate. And so it's not that different than you've probably all experienced it before. If you're driving down the highway, sort of gazing off into space, you've probably entered that mind state before. It's the same mind state that you're in right before you go to sleep. So how is this mind state or this mind condition discovered? Well, it turns out that there's a guy named Mesmer who was into some kind of unusual things. He was big into what he thought of as artificial tides. Now, mind you, this was kind of the science of the era. He thought that the moon created tides on the earth, and that we can create tides within the human body, and he believed in these things like extending these magnet therapies and metals and stuff like that for inducing things into people. He thought that there was a strong animal magnetism about it, so he would condition people with this and say things repeatedly and wave his hands around them and do all these sorts of hocus-pocus things. And he thought it was really all the hocus-pocus things and the magnets that was doing it. But really what was getting people into that state and being suggestible and doing all those sort of things was the repeated interactions, the calm state, and the belief in what they were doing. Because it came from a guy who believed in those sort of things, everybody discredited him and thought that, well, not everybody, but a lot of people discredited him, and it made hypnosis sort of a wonky pseudoscience area for a long time. In the it had a little bit of revival, a little bit of strength after the early 1800s. And Ben Franklin even scientifically proved wrong the basis of hypnosis. But the way Ben Franklin did it was his controls were a little bit different, a little bit flawed, and he was looking for very stark, very strong results instead of something a little bit more subtle. Then along came the Civil War, and doctors who were trying to figure out ways to do surgery, about bullet wounds on people. It's painful, you know, just here's a shot, a couple shots of vodka or whatever, and, you know, bite the bullet, chomp down on that, and just bear with the pain. So some Civil War doctors tried to use hypnosis for that, and it actually kind of worked a little bit better than expected. Then hypnosis had all the pseudoscience background, all the, you know, whatever. But then in the last 20, 30 years, the last 10 to 20 especially, the new brain imaging techniques, all of the modern scientific principles have been applied to it. Instead of it being sort of this hogwashing thing, it turns out that there are a lot of very hard scientific results. We're still learning a lot about it, but there is something there that's undeniable. Actually, a couple of the University of Pennsylvania has a big research lab on this, as do a couple other universities. And a little bit of other background is that there's a number of guilds as well. If I showed you here, I'm certified via the National Guild of Hypnotists. There are 2 other major guilds in the U.S., and one of them will only admit you if you are a licensed practitioner of some sort of medicine. So to give you an idea, when I came into this, I was wondering, okay, what sorts of folks are going to be in this class with me? I had no idea. It turns out that there was only one person who didn't have a PhD in a science-related field. And I was the only person who was not in a medicine or biology area. So it is very heady stuff. Now, how does it work? Well, it's really a combination of a number of things all brought together at the same time. The first is relaxation. Now, if you're relaxed, if you go to a hypnotist, they're expecting to be relaxed, sleepy, etc., etc., etc. Relaxation does a number of things for the brain. First up is, when you're in a relaxed state, you can access your memories more easily. If you're having trouble, if you're trying to remember where to put my keys, just relax. And that will, and just stop thinking about it, and just like, oh, you know, what am I looking for? Oh, my keys. You do that, you're more likely to find them very quickly. When you're stressed, your brain shuts down those processes. It's looking at the acute response. What is the immediate threat? What is the immediate thing I need to do? So relaxation helps with memory. Now, granted, there's also some caveats there. So if you use, there's some folks who use hypnosis for forensic research or forensic science in police cases, but there's problems there because every time you access a memory, you kind of rewrite to it. And this is a new study that came out a couple of years ago, I think last year or the year before, that so if you keep on retelling the same memory to someone over and over again, or to different people, but you aren't re-anchored, you're not corrected on that, you will drift over time and you recall. If you don't recall it, and you forget about it for 10 years and you recall it again, you're more likely to recall it accurately than if you keep recalling it repeatedly. So you have to be very, very careful. With hypnosis, also because of the high suggestibility, you can inject new memories into people as well, and make them believe it. And I'll explain more about that in just a second. Also, with hypnosis and being relaxed, it helps enhance creativity. Creativity is predicated upon four elements, really. This is also in the psychological research. One is that it's correlated with IQ. Creativity correlates with intelligence, well, IQ, up until about an IQ about 120, and then they're not correlated anymore. So you need to see the base amount of intelligence. There is divergent thinking, which is kind of just how your brain is wired. Another one is your domain knowledge, how much you know about a particular area, how much you would store up here as opposed to on your smartphone. And so if you have all of that up there, now you have the memory that is being accessed more easily, you can be more creative. And the last piece is being relaxed and or bored. If you want to improve your creativity, it's actually good to sit at that bus stop or go mow the lawn or do something that requires no brain work, because that will engage you. It's actually required. If you don't have enough of that downtime in your life, it will diminish your creativity. So hypnosis here is improving on two of the aspects of creativity. You've also heard about hypnosis as being all about the suggestions, about slipping something into your mind. And when you're in that mental state, you're just a little more robotic, just a little bit. If you go up and ask people for things, ask people for favors, if you ask them their right ear, they're more likely to do it than in their left. That's been shown by a couple of studies of graduate students having a wonderful time spending their grant money going out to bars and asking people for dates and measuring results. But hypnosis is sort of a shortcut into that process of injecting thoughts in your mind and letting it in. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The last is a sense of awe and comfort. What they recommend is whenever you're going to put somebody under hypnosis, they recommend you put them in an environment that is a little different. It's comfortable, but it's not something they're used to. It's not their home, it's not their living room. But it's a comforting office or a comforting room. And you also want to push a sense of awe from the hypnotist. You want to give a sense that this really works, because the more that they believe it will work, the more it will. And it leverages that. I'll jump ahead to the placebo effect. The hypnosis, the current belief is that it uses the placebo, the same thing as the placebo effect in some way. And the placebo effect is very fascinating in the medical literature. There's some issues with it, and some studies have shown it's not very strong in certain areas, other areas it's very strong. Even to the sense of, there was another article that came out recently talking about, they put a cast on a whole bunch of, I forget how many, like 100 students' arms for a week. And then they told 50% or 50% of them to imagine, like, think about working out. Like, none of them were allowed to work out. Think about working out for 10, 20 minutes very rigorously, and walk them through that. And the other 50%, they didn't do anything. Turns out after that week, the ones that thought about that lost less muscle strength than the ones that didn't. So there are a lot of feedback cycles in the mind about maybe it's engaging different hormone systems and what have you. And last thing is biases. Hypnosis really works strong on, it uses biases, as a matter of fact. If I tell you, if you believe something really strongly, regardless of whether it's true or not, but you believe it, if I present to you evidence that is contrary to what you believe, you're more likely to be stronger in your belief. If you go to one of those cults that believe the world's going to end on this date, we're all going to go up to the roof and party because it's the end of the world doesn't end, it turns out they believe it's stronger after that experience. It works in politics, it works in religion, it works in many different things. If you see yourself arguing with people, you're arguing in a relationship, you kind of have to pull it apart, let both of yourselves cool down, otherwise you dig your heels in deeper. The way hypnosis works is you get the person in that relaxed state, they're being suggested what to do, and now because they're starting to believe in that, anything that is presented to the contrary, they're going to believe more strongly. So when hypnotists tell you you're not going to remember anything, you'll forget all of this, that's not entirely true. All of those things that you just went through are still stored in your brain, but because you're suggested into believing that you're not going to remember it, anybody that asks, oh, don't you remember that, will force you and use those psychological mechanisms against it, so you will insist that you do not remember it. You do not remember what happened. So really, all hypnosis is a combination of things, of basic psychological principles, using them together in sort of a hacky kind of way, kind of hacking the brain just a little bit. Now, like I said, how do we know this is true? How do we know this is something real as opposed to just people pretending it? Well, this is where all of the technology comes in. When people are put under hypnosis, no matter what you do, EEG, fMRI, all those sort of things, they give different readouts than they do when the person is not hypnotized. You can see all these different brainwaves here. Brainwaves are the sort of the frequency the different parts of your brain are being updated. And there's sort of some message being sent through at a certain number of cycles per second. When you're in a hypnotic state, your brainwave is that theta wave, the theta pattern, which is, again, like I said, right before you go to sleep. If you look at some of the fMRI studies, they'll show different parts of your brain activated while you're under hypnosis as opposed to when you're not. Now, in the hypnosis certification course, we did look at some of these things. And one of the common devices that is used by hypnotists today is the skin conductivity measures. Even some game controllers have those. It measures the amount of sweat coming off of your skin, and it's actually very sensitive and detect minute changes to that. That is a good proxy in terms of your brain frequency, your brain state. It's not a perfect proxy. So a lot of hypnotists will, when they're putting you under, if they're doing hypnotherapy, will hook your finger up to one of those skin conductivity measures, and then they'll act, as they're pulling you under, they see and they want to get to a certain level. Because if they put you too far under, you're likely to fall asleep. If they don't put you into a low enough state, you're likely to not take the suggestions. So there is an optimal peak. Good hypnotists, the stage hypnotists, tend to find the people who are best anchored into that state. But also, very experienced hypnotist can kind of tell. You get kind of a read on people in terms of where they are. Then once you've put a person under, you want to do something that's known as a depth test. And this is a measurement to validate that I got them in the right level of hypnosis. And it can be something as simple as, try to open your eyes, but you can't. It can be as, and then you work your way up the level to the extent where you might pull their arm up and lie there and say, your arm is locked. And you let go of it and you see if it falls down or not. The more deep ones are when you can actually induce artificial hallucinations. One of the fun ones is you ask a person to count from 1 to 10, and then you say that you'll forget the number 6, you repeat that a number of times or some number, and then you ask them to count from 1 to 10 again, and they will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10. Some people who aren't as susceptible or aren't as deep might stutter on that 6. They won't get it quite right away, but it's hard for them to do. And if they're not under all the way, then they'll plow right through it. And then also the other depth tests look at things like you see something in the wall, or you explain that they see something in the wall, and you ask if they see it, and you ask them to describe it. And that's when you get people who you'll tell them that the chair is empty, but there's really a person sitting on it, and they'll go sit in that chair. Those are the positive and negative hallucinations that you can induce with that. So what are the best and worst cases? There's a lot of myths regarding hypnosis about, I don't want to get stuck in that. There's tons of movies made out of it. Well, the worst thing that will happen is you fall asleep. Or you sit there for 5 or 10 minutes and then you get back up. That's almost basically the worst case. If you put a suggestion into somebody, it will last anywhere from minutes to up to a week or 2 usually. That's the absolute maximum. If a person doesn't want to be hypnotized, they won't be. Just in general, they won't be. If you give them a suggestion, they're just sort of, they're under hypnosis, they're not very strong into it, it may last a minute or 2. There were a couple people that I hypnotized who, gave them the 1 through 10 test, and they stuttered a little bit, and the next time they said 1 through 10, they got it right, so that they didn't pick it off. The only way you can get it up to more than a few hours or beyond that is the person has to really want to do it. If a person wants to change their behavior, break a habit, stop smoking, do something like that, and they really, really want to do it, then the suggestion can stick for up to a couple of weeks, maximum. And like I said before, your memories are still all stored. One of the big questions is also, can you be hypnotized to do something against your will? And this is actually kind of an open question. If you ask a lot of hypnotists, they will tell you absolutely no. But there have been a couple of cases that call that into question, or what will somebody actually do? Darren Brown, a famous hypnotist, con man, all sorts of things from the UK, did 2 things. One where he gave people a vat of acid, showed them that it was real acid while they're hypnotized, and then switched it without them seeing, very, very covertly, and then instructed the hypnotized person to splash another person in the face with the acid. And they did, even though it was water. But he switched it out when they weren't seeing. Another case he did was he got people to rob a bank. Another famous hypnotist is known for telling people that that the napkins are $100 bills, and at a restaurant or something like that. They will scramble for those $100 bills, or somebody will go up afterward and pick up all the $100 bills, not like inconsiderate of whether or not the person had it, if it was on the lap, or things like that. It really kind of brings out those sort of things. So it's probably not. You probably can't be hypnotized against something that you do, but there may be some exceptions, still below. You can also have some creative outcomes. As my hypnosis instructor said, regardless of what you think about whether or not people have ever had past lives or reincarnation, if you practice hypnosis, you will end up with a non-trivial number of clients who strongly believe that they did and recall that during their hypnotic state. That comes back into the creative processes about where did they get these sort of information, are they making it up, where did it come from, some story they played in their head, who knows, but it does happen. Also is a number of opposite suggestions. There's a couple of tests that you can do before you hypnotize somebody to see whether or not the hypnosis is likely to stick. Some people will do exactly the opposite, and you kind of don't want to hypnotize them because you don't know how they're going to react or what they're going to do. About 95% of people can be hypnotized, and it correlates pretty well with intelligence as well. If your IQ is less than about 80, you probably cannot be hypnotized. As it goes up, the ability to hypnotize somebody gets better, although there's not been a lot of studies for high IQ people. If you look at the age, the optimal time to hypnotize people is about their early, like late teens to early 20s, and it sort of declines a little bit as the person gets older. Anybody who wants to participate in a suggestibility test, this is a pre-hypnotic test. I'm not going to actually hypnotize you, but if you want to, you can stand up. And I'm just going to do it in place, so you're not going to come up here. Okay. Anybody else who wants to try this? All right, so stand up, just relax a little bit. Make sure you've got some space around you, some space in front of you. Wait for everyone to get adjusted here a little bit. All right, now I want you to all close your eyes. And I want you to just relax. Now I know most of you, probably all of you, have a very good imagination. Good. You're all nice and relaxed. Now I'd like to do a procedure, and I'm going to show you how well you can use your imagination. Could you make sure that you have the space around you like I just said before, and then close your eyes again. Now, good. Let your arms hang at your sides loosely. Just relax and let your arms hang loosely. Now keep your eyes closed. And if you will, raise your arms forward and upward towards your shoulder level so that your arms are straight out in front of you, both of them. Now, extend your right thumb so that your right thumb points to the ceiling as if you're going to give me a thumbs up. Good. Now this process has to do with imagination. And what I'd like to do now is imagine, visualize if you can, pretend if you have to, that in the left hand, you're going to turn your left hand up so it's facing the ceiling. And imagine in this left hand is a book, a really heavy book, that math book from college, that math book from high school, a history book, something extremely heavy that is, you can smell that old library scent of it. And in your right hand, imagine that there is a string tied to it. There's a string connected up to a red balloon that sits about a foot above your head. And that balloon is quite big. It's filled with helium. It's pulling your right hand up. It's pulling it up and up and up. And your left hand, that heavy book, that scent, that whatever color it is that you remember it, with all of those thick pages, is pushing your left hand down and pushing it down and pushing it down. And your left hand is falling, and your right hand is rising. And your left hand is falling, and your right hand is rising. Now I'd like you all to freeze your arms exactly as they are right now. Now open your eyes. Are any of you surprised at the distance, look around, between your arms and how far they've moved? Anyone who's, you can just relax now. Anyone who is really surprised by it, raise your hand. Okay, so doing a suggestibility test, those people who have the most distance between their hands are most likely to be put under very easily. Now, as I said before, probably 95% of people can be hypnotized, but it depends on a number of factors, and you have to tailor the hypnosis right to them. If you notice, I use some words like I said, visualize, I use smell, I use allow, permit. I use different words that tell you something or I allow you to think something. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reach out to as many people as I can. You really have to tailor the hypnosis to the individual person. There is permissive versus authoritative. Some people really need to, they really need to be in control, and you need to let them feel the imagery. You need to let them command the room. Versus other people, you need to tell them what to do. And a lot of times, most of the time even, you can kind of pick up on the same person. If they're kind of passive, they're very, very domineering, but not always. Sometimes it will surprise you in terms of what works best. And this is very important in hypnosis because if you do the wrong one, you will lose the person entirely. Also, the modality of how you process information the best is vitally important for hypnosis. There have been a number of studies, people that say that, oh, you know, I'm a visual learner, I'm an audio learner, I'm a kinesthetic learner, I need to feel and do things. Turns out that that's not very strong, not nearly as strong as people thought it was in the learning communities. They thought that you really need to learn in the way that you think, the way you think. Not so much. In hypnosis, it is vital again. Some people are very visual thinkers, some people are auditory thinkers, some people are kinesthetic. Smells usually work across the board. That's why I was telling you, you smell that old library, smell in that book. And And that tends to, as long as it resonates with some memory in you, it's more likely to resonate and work on you. And then the last thing, as I mentioned before, is that there's a correlation between intelligence and hypnotizability, but there's a little caveat here. Some people, they think, oh, I'm curious about hypnosis, you know, I'm well read in this kind of stuff. I'm not sure if it'll work on me. They go to a hypnotist or they go to a stage hypnotist and it doesn't work so well. That needs to be tailored as well. If you're a very logical thinker, if you're a highly intelligent thinker, you need something to distract that part of your mind, that logical part of your mind, in order for the suggestions and the relaxation to take part. There's some interesting fMRI studies that have come out in the last couple of years that have shown that your emotional part, your emotional reasoning, your social reasoning, and your physical reasoning parts of your brain cannot both be active at the same time. And really when you're trying to hypnotize somebody who's a very logical thinker, you kind of have to distract their logical part of their mind by some very rote, easy task. Like, for example, writing letters on a chalkboard and having them process that while you're telling them all of these suggestions. And then you let them kind of go on their own and fill in the gaps. A funny thing about that, though, is language, and you have to watch out for different words, too. If you hypnotize somebody who is in IT and they work with cloud computing, and you say, relax, imagine you're on a cloud, they might think of their cloud, their rack server at their work, and now you just heard the person do bubble. Additionally, people who speak different languages natively sometimes need a little bit of tailoring as well. Hypnosis works generally very well across languages, but suppose you ask a Chinese person to recite the alphabet or write the alphabet on a chalkboard to distract that person. If the Latin alphabet is not something they really need to think about, and it's not natural to them, that technique will not work. So I'm saying here is that a lot of the hypnotic techniques, when you really want to get one person hypnotized, you have to tailor them towards that person. Also, the more you're hypnotized, the more it will work. So the first time might be very difficult. I've talked to a couple of hypnotists that they've had some difficult clients that have taken 3 to 4 sessions to actually finally get under hypnosis. Versus other people, it's 5-10 minutes and they're under, they're easy. There's also a strong correlation with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and hypnotizability. If somebody has PTSD, they're probably really easy to hypnotize. So now, I mentioned before, here's all these practices. Before I step into this, let me also say that the way we normally do a hypnotic session is you get the person in this environment, you learn about them, you do the suggestibility tests, you find out what they like, you find out how they process information, what they think about, and then you get them to relax a little bit. You go through some sort of ritual. And as you go through repeating the words over and over again, it starts to feel like a ritual. If you're doing multiple hypnosis sessions, you always start with the same way. You might do a more condensed version because the person is easier to get under hypnosis, but you still do the same type of process. Then once you get them under, you deepen them, then you put them in a situation that's very comforting, you give them a little bit of story, or you let them give the story. Then you give the message if you're trying to instill something in somebody, or if you're a stage hypnotist, then you have them you give them the message, then have them perform in front of the audience. And then at the end, you can also tell them to techniques to self-hypnotize themselves. You can hypnotize yourself, and then you bring them out. The way that you bring them out is very simple. It's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, snap, and a few things more than that. But that's the general idea. And the self-hypnosis works because once you get into that state, you realize what it's like. You get that feel. It feels really great. You feel like you just relaxed more than you've relaxed in a long time. It's almost like you've taken a little nap. Most people, when they're under hypnosis, think that a lot less time has passed than it really has. You bring someone under hypnosis, you ask them, how long did that feel? Oh, 5 minutes, maybe 10, and it's 40 minutes into the session. There's a few people who feel the opposite, though, that it feels a lot longer, but that's much more rare. So the self-hypnosis is once you're in that state, you can say some things to yourself, sort of distract yourself, give yourself these repeated messages, and relax back into that state. Again, if you've ever had if you've ever been falling asleep and you start to have those dreams where you're sort of awake, you might be talking to somebody else and you're kind of half there, half not. That's like one step past the level that you want the suggestibility. So it's when you're telling somebody to hypnotize themselves to try to do something better, you want to have them do that right before they go to sleep because you're already sort of in a very relaxed environment. So where have we seen things that are kind of like hypnosis? And this was a big revelation to me after I learned and started seeing these patterns of hypnosis. Now, in in the program, we're given a lot of scripts, and many hypnotists read from scripts because you want to make sure you're using the same words. You want to make sure you're using the same words that the person used, so that you're thinking the way they were thinking. There's a lot of mimicry plays as well. If somebody is talking to you and they're making certain gestures, and you make the same sort of gestures, and you're standing in the same posture, there's a lot of affinity there. There's a lot of neurons in the brain, a lot of pathways that fire and say this person's mimicking me, they're like me, and give me more of the suggestions. So I started thinking about all this stuff. Okay, where do we see these sort of things? Where do we see this? Just think about sporting events. Sports fans, they tend to do the same. You have the same ritual, the national anthem, some sort of pre-game ritual, and then they go into it, and they close it. It's a very common thing. The idea of a ritual follows very closely that of hypnosis, especially if you have a sense of awe or you have a sense of relaxation, or both. So you see this all the time in religion. You see you come in, there might be some singing, there might be some rituals to get you relaxed. You have a slight feeling of euphoria, that a message is delivered and then it's closed. Politics, a lot of politicians focus on keywords, and a lot of times they do that to push those words into the people that they're talking to, so that they repeat those words and kind of give a branding message. But at the same time, that same repetition gives that form of mimicry and gets you sort of in the mob mind, or just thinking in that way. Lulls you into the opening and then sort of tries to deliver a message and then closes. If you have any speech professor, they tell you to do these same sort of things. Is this hypnosis? No, not really, but it's close to it. It's that same sort of pattern. Funny little story, when I was working on Akron, the time travel RTS, my art director sent me the new loading screen, and I opened it up, and of course there was like two other people in the room with me, and we were just sitting there. The image opened up, and we're just sitting looking at the screen, and it took us about 20 seconds to realize that we were already looking at the loading screen. We were prompted into that mental state, we were conditioned into that, put into that lull, that sense of, oh, it's time to relax. I don't need to be engaged with this. And so by doing that, many of you who are gamers have already probably, not entered a state of hypnosis, but got closer to it, that sort of more relaxed mind state. So we're going to see hypnotic induction in games and hypnotic principles. Who here has played any of the old school RPGs, or even some modern RPGs? Any RPG fans here? Good chunk of folks. When you go into a town, and this is always my experience. I'm sort of a reformed RPG addict. I've stopped playing RPGs so much anymore. But you go to a town, you have a sense of relaxation. I can sort of take my time. I'm not fighting monsters. I can upgrade my guys. You put yourself in a different mental mode. And that's actually very similar. That sudden sense of relaxation with that. Although there's always that one town that has the monsters in it, you have to fight them, but that's it. Sort of. Hypnotic induction in games is also related to the exposition about when you are being presented the narrative. There might be certain areas that are getting you to relax before a message is delivered, or things that are repeated. Game music. A lot of folks, if you're at MAGFest, there's a decent chance that you like video game music. If you go to some like concert, you have that reinforcement, that tingly feeling, that ooh, this brings me back to that certain mood. And one of the things that I've always found fascinating about video game music, unlike virtually every other type of music, is that the music is designed to evoke a single emotion that is being repeated over and over again. You listen to a song on the radio, there's sort of a flow, they may have a chorus in a different key or whatever, and then that's it. You listen to classical music, there's a sort of overarching theme, there's a narrative, opera, things like that, there's something overarching. Game music is one flat emotion, and we're going to play this for a little while, and when the player engages, when the player goes somewhere else, we're going to deliver a different set of music. If you're engaged in a battle, it's one set of music. If you're engaged in a town, it's a different set of music, or different characters. And some of those those songs that relax us can also bring you into closer to those states. Grind. If you're grinding and leveling up and doing something that's very monotonous, if you're more of a logical thinker, think about some of the casual games you've played, some of those that you're just sitting there flicking and it's very rote. You're starting to get yourself more into that hypnotic state. So, as a game designer, one of my questions is, well, how do we use this? And how can we use this, both for good and for for evil. Well, to begin with, why do people get hypnotized in general? Most people become hypnotized to break a habit, remove pain, all sorts of things. But one of them, and many athletes get hypnotized, is for performance. Looking at Olympic athletes, when they're running, when they're performing at their peak, their muscles are fully engaged when they're moving, but when that muscle is not needed, it is at full relaxed state. And one of the things that I wish everyone had told me when I was growing up, trying to be an athlete, was relax. Looking at, my uncle is a competitive archer, and he says that if you go to these high-up competitions, you look at all of the athletes that are, or archers I should say, that are the ones who are really trying to do well, they're just barely made it in there, they're worried that they're not going to do well, they're all uptight, they're all focused on everything. And the guys who are at their best, the ones who remain in the top 10, they're relaxing, they're joking, they're having fun. Oh, it's my turn, okay, hang on, let me go do that, bam, and then you're going back to joking. It's that ability to turn it on and turn it off. And hypnosis can help you get there. It also, being relaxed helps you improve memory and reflexes, as I mentioned before. If you're trying to think strategically, if you're trying to figure out what to do in a football game, like I need to see the field, being relaxed and comfortable in that sort of environment will help you think more clearly. And hypnosis can help you get into those states and also figure out how to stay in those states yourself. It can also improve concentration and focus because you're in that relaxed state to begin with. Similarly, as I mentioned before, that thought of, I told you the study of the students who had their arm in a cast, those who thought about the exercise, those who didn't, had some sort of effect. Nobody knows how that works yet. That's a very recent result, but it's pretty strong. So whether it's hormones, whether it's like little neurons firing, like motor neurons, who knows? But the ability to rehearse and leverage those sort of behind-the-scenes things, like rehearsing, like, how should I do this, how should I do that, how would I react in this state, that practice. Hypnosis can help you do that. It can help you focus more and get in that relaxed state so your mind's not distracted thinking about, oh, I forgot to take out the garbage today, I need to do that tomorrow, and I have these 10 errands I need to run. You'll focus on the discipline that you want to. How can we use hypnosis in gaming? And this is what I think is very fascinating. The sensors and the feedback that we have today are pretty phenomenal. Lots of controllers, your phones have so many sensors that can read so many things about you, so how can we leverage that data and know what sort of mental state and how engaged you are? There's a couple of products out there. I believe you can get an EEG for around $200 to $300, which will measure your brain frequency. You plug that in, and I've seen, I think it was at GDC a couple of years ago even, there was one product being shown that they were trying to pitch this to game companies so that the game companies can make games that read your mental state and how engaged you are and give that sort of feedback. I haven't seen it take off, but it's there. There's similar games where you're both sitting in a chair relaxed, and the person who relaxes more, you're both watching something move, like you're watching a ball move or something. The more relaxed you are, the more it goes towards your opponents. It's the field. So it's a game about who can relax the most. And you get frustrated, like, no, and that makes you lose faster. And so you have to relax more. So that's a sort of a one-off, very simple game, but how can we build these sort of things into game mechanics and then get the players to relax, to perform better? Imagine that your control, that your guys show different colors or had better abilities when you were more relaxed. You get yourself conditioned to be in that relaxed state, and you have better reflexes, you have better memory, you have better strategic thinking. So those are ways that it can be used very positively. Now, games can also pick up a lot of the, remember before I told you that there's kinesthetic learners, there's people who need visual input, audio input, this is the way they think. Games may be able to pick up some of those things. I've talked before in some of my other talks on how games can measure whether you're dieting based on your certain behaviors, whether or not you're depressed. There's all sorts of psychological metrics that simple decisions in puzzle games or simple decisions in games can tease out from you. So if we pull in some of those, perhaps we can start to look at these different ways to hone in and adapt the message and adapt the relaxation state to the individual. To do this, though, we might have to break that fourth wall. We might have to say, hey, you relax, you as a player. Maybe that's done in a tutorial, but maybe it'll yield some new fourth wall breaking mechanisms. Also, it could potentially be done subtly. You saw the loading screen before, and many of you just sort of like got into that relax, again, waiting. there ways that games can do that without being so overt, saying, you're feeling sleepy, you're imagining this? Are there ways, can we get people in hypnotic states just from playing a game? I don't know anybody else who's asking that question besides me, but now I'm asking that question. And then how can we really leverage these things to get the player to focus, to break addictions, to create addictions to good things, create new positive habits in a person's life? And then, if you're a game company, especially if you're a casual game company, how can we deliver us more revenue? How can we get people to get into that state where they feel it's almost addictive, they want to play this game, they want to feel in that relaxed state? How can we make ourselves a monopoly on that game? Maybe we'll see something like that in a few years, who knows? So with that, I'll open the floor for any questions. Yeah, you in the back. Can you speak up, please?
What are your thoughts on hypnosis in a game like, I don't know.
So what are my thoughts on a game, MMO and hypnosis? Well, I think that one of the neat things about MMOs is that some MMOs are really good at showing leadership and having people engage in leadership roles. If anyone who's played, you guys have played Artemis here, that's really awesome. But that'd be very, it wouldn't be an MMO, but that'd be a very small thing. But focusing on those sorts of abilities, I could see hypnosis being used to sort of enhance those, or with leader, maybe even hypnotizing people, or using some script that says, all right, we're all going to get hypnotized and be in a relaxed state to perform better. I could also see, well, I guess a more nefarious purpose would be is if you require players to become hypnotized to participate in this MMO. And maybe you inject certain messages, like you have the game, put the player under, give them a suggestion, and then bring them back out of it. They think that they're not hypnotized anymore, but they still carry that suggestion with them. So when they see the color, they see a red circle, they'll act a certain way. And you kind of engineer that behavior, maybe use that strategically to your opponent. Maybe there could be power-ups or different items that you could achieve that will force your opponents to receive those types of messages. It'd be a very fascinating and interesting game. Yeah, Rob? Have I seen an automated hypnosis process? Yes, they're called tapes. There's a number of hypnotists who sell tapes, and the funny thing about hypnosis is that it is really simple to do. You just have to, the reason that they want to put you through a certification is so that you kind of know all the bounds around it, so that you're doing it right. Now, granted, you have to be good at enunciating, you have to make the person feel relaxed, but as long as you have social skills, it's a very easy skill to acquire. If you've been hypnotized before, from a tape, you can put yourself back under it again. Again, there's some people who are very hard to hypnotize because they're very challenging, so I'm not saying that it's always easy, but the general principles are pretty easy to learn. Yeah?
Do you think possible hypnosis is more emotional ability to draw in a more interesting narrative? Really, because a lot of games today have an issue with really drawing the player in, getting that first look at the story. Would it be possible to use hypnosis to kind of just knock down their guard?
So that's an interesting question. Can hypnosis be used to enhance a player's experience with regard to the narrative? And that's an interesting question. I'm not sure what the answer to that would be. My thoughts on it are that a person, if you're hypnotized, you're told to experience things this way. You may be not experiencing it deeply, but let's say that I'm bringing up a deep memory and really tailored into you. Maybe you have a game that mined your Facebook account, found that you broke up with this person, or you had like something bad happened to you and really tails into that. You can pull a person out into that emotion and then put them back into the narrative, so to sort of anchor them. You might also get to the person without going so deep, just to say, imagine being sad, try to get them in that emotion. And you could probably tailor it a little bit, because when you're in a specific emotive state, if you're sad, it's much easier to remember sad memories, much more difficult to remember happy memories. Memories are very selective based on the emotion. So if you want the player to feel happy, and then it might be self-reinforcing, so I could see potential use for that. But to do that, you need the player to sort of agree to that and say, okay, I'm being under hypnosis. And again, for a game to measure how hypnotized they are, perhaps there are ways, there's some of the, there's some sensors that can measure your heart rate. It's something that maybe you can get a proxy for that, but really you want a skin connectivity sensor to do better, to really know if the person is under. And they also need some sort of consent to want to do that. And players could could obviously not decide, I don't want to be hypnotized. You sit there, you don't want to be hypnotized, you won't be. Yeah? If I played Amnesia, I have not played it, but I'm familiar with it.
At the beginning, they just put you flash from the brain, and it says this is the best experience headphones in the dark.
Yeah.
And they let you sit there and dismiss it yourself. And they just close it and do it. Like a low experience.
Yeah. Yeah, so there are like I said, to the best of my knowledge, no game that I can find that I've seen actually puts someone in a hypnotic state, to the best of my knowledge. Now granted, if you were, like I said, if you're driving on the highway, you're kind of feeling something monotonous, if you're grinding, then you kind of are entering a hypnotic state yourself. So you can find, I'm sure that if you look out there, you can probably find a large number of parts of games where you do get in closer or into that hypnotic state if you engage in it fully. But I also need to caution that there is a difference between hypnosis and immersion. That hypnosis is is related to a very specific type of immersion, of relaxation, but it doesn't mean all immersion. Yeah. Tetris, like the Tetris effect. Yeah, so for those of you not familiar with the Tetris effect, if you play Tetris for a couple hours and go to sleep, and you do that for day in, day out for a few days, you will have dreams of Tetris. I can almost guarantee you that. It's the psychological mechanisms that actually call it the Tetris effect. It does apply for other games as well. Whether or not that's whether or not that would be called hypnosis, I'm not sure. Going back to how I defined hypnosis before, is pulling together these psychological mechanisms all together. Is it hypnosis if you pull in 3 or 4 of these? It's kind of a blurry definition. Yeah, so the question is, with Tetris, the longer you play, the better you get it, the less your brain is engaged. And if you do that enough, and you're good enough at Tetris that you don't need to think anymore, you may eventually be in a hypnotic state. Now, I've got to be careful with that with Tetris, because Tetris, from a mathematical perspective, and this may be one of the first talks that I've given in a long time that does not have an equation in it, but Tetris is an NP-complete problem, which means it's very difficult mathematically. If you're not engaged at that level, if you're not, if you just do sort of an automator, you're not really trying to just trying to flow, in that flow state makes it not too hard for you, I guess probably yes, you could enter a hypnotic state in playing Tetris. Yeah. The difference between hypnotic state and a flow state. It depends. So flow state usually means that you're actively engaged, and you feel like you're sort of the cusp, like some of the logic parts of your brain are engaged as well. So hypnosis would be it's closely related to the flow state, but not quite. The difference is it's easy enough such that you can disengage that thinking part of your brain. And there's probably there may be something you're also much more relaxed as well from a flow state, so you may be less energized too. So there is, I would say, there's a relation between the states, but they're still pretty far apart. Any other questions? All right, thank you.